I don't think we as a society, as a world, I don't think nobody taught us how to be alone. I think we're afraid to be alone, right? So then when something like this comes, which is basically it's a pandemic of isolation, right? So when something like this comes along, you're forced to be with yourself. Now, in the era of checking the cell phones all the time and being distracting it's almost like the whole environment is against self-reflection or quietness.
This is a generation that actually saw for the first time in their lives someone being murdered, killed on television. That impact is not going away. It almost reminds me of my dad, who was from the South, who actually witnessed a lynching that stayed with him the rest of his life. He was 7 years old and you don't lose that stuff. You learn how to deal with it.
I'll tell you frankly, there's certain days I'm happy to be masked, so I can just move in and out.
Every conversation that we have means something. It's so important, the amount of conversations that you can have, because you can learn a lot. Even if it's from an opposing view, you can still learn something. If we want change to come, I always go by the phrase, if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. So if you want change to really take place, you have to first think beyond your thoughts and yourself and listen to the needs and the wants of the people that's next to you. Because their needs and wants are just as important as yours. And in that way, you'll be able to come to an understanding and create something that works for everybody.
So having an opportunity to go back and look at images from before of that, we do sort of ache for those moments because they were so, we took them for granted in a way.
I typically have 35, 37 students in a classroom. They don't turn on their cameras. Now, you could naughty students, you're not turning on your cameras, but there's all kinds of reasons because they didn't choose this online venue. They may not have a camera. They may not have the bandwidth to use a camera. They might be in a situation where they're not dressed appropriately, or they're in their bedroom, which they share with somebody else, and they don't want, the camera. So there can be all kinds of reasons why they're not using their cameras. So as faculty members, we can't insist that they use their cameras because we don't know the reasons why they're not. You have to be respectful of their choices.
Going into 2020 in general, I had a grandma that unfortunately passed away, so it was a hard time for me to come in. And since this happened in March, it was just around my birthday, I would say 11 to 8 days, somewhere around that till my birthday was. And it was just a really hard time for me to adjust in general.
I'm telling you, 2020 sucked.
I had waited forever to live alone again. I've had two husbands and 3 children. And the last time I lived alone was 1969. And so I was great with this. So I could write when I wanted, I could paint when I wanted. It's a very small town. I live off of a dirt road. I can go outside, nature, I can walk. I did not have some of the problems that some people did. And I was careful, but I'm not obsessive either.
That's the irony of America. We rely on children to raise us. That's our mistake. We had no legendary fathers. We had no legendary mothers. We arrived on boats and it was the sick kids that survived. And those were the ones that became our forefathers and became America. Think about that. We were raised by teenage kids and we still act like it. So for me, if there's no justice with the George Floyd case, there's no justice, period.
It was quite, shocking, monumental. It was, there was a lot going on in my life at that time anyways. My mom was, needing care, and all our siblings were all taken care of her that way. So, I would look at the news and just, yell at the TV with the COVID conferences that were going on, and just following everything through the New York Times and things on
I had
Facebook.
waited
Trying
forever
not
to
to
live alone again. I
alienate
have
Every
friends, and
conversation
two
that we
husbands
have
kind of.
means
Eventually, I
three
figured on
something.
children.
Facebook, well, the
It's
thing I
so
could do
The
is
important.
last
the
time I
irony.
express
lived alone
joy.
was
So
like
I
You
just
can learn a
post
lot.
some
Even if it's
To
from
raise
an
our
First
old
time,
school,
and,
you can
and,
still
Photoshop
and
learn
in
a
your
things.
lot.
life,
And
If we
someone
went
being
through
murdered
I always
and
whatever.
killed on
unfortunately
television
passed away.
Keep up
has
responsibly.
an impact
I like to
so
say that 2020 is the year of realization for myself. I
Back
realized
and look at images
every
from
day
childhood
what
every day.
my perspective were. Because of that because our nation which I was so I think
There's no justice
that
period.
whole component of taking care of myself, that's
I'll tell
something
you
that
frankly, there's
needs
certain days
to
I'm happy to
be with
masked,
me
so I can just
forever
move in
because
and
I
out.
forget myself sometimes. So, yeah.
We lost our own identity somehow. Kind of, we like a little animal who try to escape from the reality to little hole or safe place to survive almost.
Just listening sharper, just listening sharper with my ears as well as with my heart. It's almost as if you can hear what a person is saying without them actually saying it sometimes. I don't know, some type of a sense. It's like God telling you what the motivation is behind the person of what they're saying and or what they're doing. In my family members as well as coworkers.
It's hard not to harbor any ill will towards people who don't understand that side of the equation. Some people will think it's maybe, oh yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal. I know people who've had it and they've been fine. And then you get the stories from some of the, healthcare workers like my husband that are, really gruesome and really tragic and horrible. People dying, in pain and alone. And it's not a pleasant, it's horrible.
From the time, from January to the time that the country decided to shut down, we saw an uptick of almost 70 more fires. So it was just more cooking, people cooking, and so we're now seeing that number decline a bit. So that's promising. The country's opening back up. People are eating out again. People are stepping outside, or I dare say that they're learning how to cook.
I remember when I was a kid, the night I was sitting with my parents and John F. Kennedy was shot. I remember that when I was a little girl. And I remember seeing the fear on my parents' face, and I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew that something bad was happening, and I was scared. And I remember that to this day. I'm 62 years old. I'm almost 63. And I remember that to this day. It was just, you can feel the fear in the air. And I think that's what it was for the kids. They knew we were scared. They knew all of a sudden it was like, shut down, call your parents, let's go.
I sum up my role as the fork in the road. When kids get to me, they're usually, especially the high schoolers, they're usually in a place where they can easily stray either way. And my job is to make sure they take that right path, which is the hard path. And that's the problem. The easy path is to say, I'm not going to school. I don't care, whatever. It's easier to play video games, whatever. The harder path is to wake up 7:30, log on, do your work virtually, be logged on the whole day, and repeat and repeat and repeat. That's the hard path. So I'm there to guide them. I'm there to push them, whatever motivations they need that I have. That's what I use to, get them steered on the right path.
Although social distancing is really difficult with people, we all know what our comfort and discomfort is, and it's like an invisible virus that we don't know much about really, other than how to take some space.
I think I just pushed myself more than I had ever. And it was just so peaceful and calming just to kind of be away from work, because I never got away from work. So being up in a mountain somewhere, or like we did Baxter State Park. I didn't climb Mount Katahdin. That was nuts, but my husband did.
They don't know what they're walking into.
But my cell phone didn't work the entire weekend.
Some people
and that
will not
was pure joy.
judge the situation correctly.
No emails, no text messages, no phone calls. It was the best.
And you have to know that.
We all know what our
perspective of both psychology and
you have to
the point of view of
when
the
police
show
show
up.
I remember when I was a kid.
And there's no question people need closure. And that's what funerals do. They provide closure. And because I think we all have had the experience, if we lost someone we love, you don't realize until you see someone else who has that experience. So we have that encounter with someone else in person. Release that emotion. Since the person died, there's going to be that
all of a sudden it was like, shut down, call your parents, let's go.
So you have to be
my parents told me to have a heart for the people, and now I see exactly why they've been on me, and I'm so thankful for that.
I don't feel particularly lonely. I think I have, of course, you'd like someone present besides my cat to be in conversation. He doesn't pick up much. But it's been great as an artist. And yet, I can't help but feel the huge inequities that have been revealed globally. And I've written, I suppose, about global grief.
I had a real good opportunity to really see and really hear the people during that. Working with law enforcement, they didn't charge for their services. They had every single street blocked off that we were crossing. They said, okay, we'll put cars here at the end of this street so you guys can march clearly. We stopped traffic and we marched. We didn't go on the highway, which wasn't going to happen because I don't believe in going on the highway because I'm scared of the highway. But working with law enforcement, working with the establishment, it paid off because then that opened more conversation. It opened more questions about, okay, what are we going to do in order to fix, this establishment? What are we going to do to combat racism?
But she died of COVID. Yeah. And so she, and her son, of course, who took care of him and her and everything, he was very much affected by that. Full of anger because of the way the pandemic was mishandled.
I remember going to my grandma's house, and then they had the news on all about it. I'm like, wow, this really happened. That really took a toll on me. When I got home, I searched it up, tried to find more information about it and everything. And the next day, it was everywhere. And I was going to the news, that would be everywhere, no matter where I went.
No, I would say more those were sort of private. There was one day where I just couldn't get out of bed. It was probably early on. I was like, I don't feel well. And it was more of like an emotional, my body was just like, take a break. And I'm glad when my body does that because I'm like, okay, I'm just going to lay in bed. And I don't know if I called out sick or what I did, but it was like a year ago. But I was glad I did that. And, some days I feel great and I'm like, oh, I feel like an 8 today, And then some days I'm like, I'm a 4 and I put my hair in a ponytail, but brush my teeth and throw some clothes on and I get to work. But it's about showing up every day. And it's funny, one day I had a doctor's appointment just for my back. And the next day, one of the boys goes, you weren't here yesterday. And I was like, I'm sorry. But you weren't here yesterday. It was so intense. Like, he's like, we expect you to be here. Like, I was kind of like taken aback, but I understood his intent. Like, I'm very stable for them, to see them every day. And for me not to be there to greet them every morning was kind of shocking. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I had a doctor's appointment, but I'm okay.
Desolate. Nobody. Like a zombie apocalypse.
My demons definitely cropped up in this year, like my addictions. Started talking big. And there were no, like the fellowship, that became a huge something that you took for granted. Don't know what you got till it's gone. When there are no AA meetings and this is going on, it gets real.
I have a partner who's very gregarious and does a lot of gardening. So right now he's out the door doing work. Spent a lot of the winter insisting that I kick off my shoes and bathe before I walk in the back door in ways that kind of felt a divide, with us. But, we're recognizing our differences with other people around us. Our neighbors aren't necessarily as safe as we have been. Some of our family members are more cautious than others. And it's interesting to kind of weigh that realization into your thought process and have it not be a judgment. And that's been a little bit of a challenge with, seeing someone's choices being so blatant to others or disregarding, and knowing that, you still want to be kind to them and understand
I would say
their
more
growth
those are
is
sort of
a
private.
necessity
There was
also
one day
for
where I just
society
couldn't get
to
out of
come
bed.
back to norm and
was probably
have this
early
degree
on.
of
I had a
respect
real
among
good
all of
opportunity to really
us.
see. I don't feel well.
But
And it was more of
we've
like an
really whittled
emotional.
down what
working
My body
with
just
I mean, I
doesn't
think as a
separate.
teacher,
I'm glad when my body does that because I'm
you know,
like, okay, she's going to lay in bed.
you deal with
Really
it.
hard not
I think I just pushed myself more than I had ever. And it was just so
I'm like, oh, I feel like it's
peaceful
today.
and calming.
I remember going to my
I think as a teacher, you deal with it. I mean, that's the shock from high school. Then made the funniest I would thank God that was horrendous. So we dealt with that. So I think teachers deal every day with crises like that. So you just, I think you react to life.
Why
What
do
you
you
got
stop
to do.
to took for granted and you don't know what you got till
Thank
it's
God,
gone?
personally in my life, I've had good health. We've never had any big
gets real.
accidents or anything. So, but I tend to just, I think, react in a positive way to most of the life's whatever it throws at you.
It's just a constant thought. Yeah, it's very, very difficult to turn that off. And then, you start thinking, okay, was that decision that I made, was that the best one? How is I going to, someone's going to be negatively impacted by a decision that I have to make. Inevitably, it happens with being in charge. It's just being a leader. You can't, do everything that's going to make a perfect scenario for everybody, but you have to do what you think is best for the masses. It's really hard to shut down and turn it off.
It's a lot, it's a lot of emotions that I think everybody's been feeling.
Well, I was very fortunate. My kids, my son, right? He was a senior in high school, so I felt very bad for him because he didn't have the senior experience, the prom, the senior cookouts, the graduation was a virtual one, and so it was a learning lesson for him. And say life is not promised. All these things that you thought you were going to get, life throws you this curveball, and you gotta swing at it and make the best of it. And so he understood that. So he joined the military. And he's in the Navy now, and so I was very fortunate that the Navy could keep him safe as best as they can anyway.
Fear is very contagious. And it's hard to not show fear, especially when it's things that you don't understand and you don't know anything about it. Nobody knew anything about this virus. So we didn't know if it was going to be a killer. I mean, I was scared at night. I was afraid that I wasn't going to wake up in the morning.
Shadow for how the sense of hope with all of this, gives us promise so that we can feel our feet planted on the ground to create. And our feet don't necessarily need to be planted on the ground, but I think the stability of that comfort helps you feel empowered with what you're doing.
But it was white and blacks again that came together, your hippies and stuff. So when I look at Black Lives Matter today, it makes me feel good to see every ethnic group out there talking about it's time for a change. So that makes me hopeful that one day, hopefully in my time, I will see where people respect, cultures respect us as who we are as people.
So it made the difficult job of treating cancer more difficult. So that's one thing. The other is this thing of, well, I could get it myself, so I can catch this. So there's a tremendous stress on the staff. They're coming in. And you've probably heard this from other healthcare workers, am I going to take this home? Am I going to affect my family?
I want them to tell me, I sit them down, tell me what you see and what you feel. What do you feel about that? What do you feel about the killing? What do you feel about Taiwan? What do you feel about George? Tell me how you feel. Tell me what could have been done for that situation not to happen. So the dialogue has to be there. You have to see where they're coming from, because a lot of times my kids have been arrested. Their parents have been arrested, and most of my kids are of color. So they, their relationship with the police is different than mine. And I have to take that in consideration. But I also have to, my point is you always have to put yourself in other people's shoes. So even though, especially the majority, the 98% of the good cops, you have to be, I tell my kids, put yourself in their shoes. If they're at a domestic violence or whatever, and, things are going on and they're walking into something they don't know what they're walking into, they're gonna, some people will not judge the situation correctly and overreact and pull out a gun and shoot you. And you have to know that, when you're arguing or whatever, you have to understand that when the police show up, you gotta calm it down. It's real. When you're driving in a car, you see the sirens, pull over. You follow directions. Don't give anybody a reason to think you're a threat. And that's, I think that's one thing I teach my kids. You gotta know how to turn it off. You gotta see the bigger picture. Kids are worried about the reputation and I ain't no punk and blah blah blah. Well, you want to be alive. And unfortunately, right now, there's a chance you could not be alive just for running a traffic sign. So this is what we're living. So you have to be cognizant of all that. And it's not being a punk. Or if you are a punk, so what? You're alive.
I will see where people respect.
That's the thing with the shadow self, and I think that's what we run from. We're afraid to look at the shadow. But if we would just embrace it, then maybe it won't dominate your life.
You can work hard to try to achieve something, and when you stop trying to achieve it because you don't seem to be achieving it, it can be right there in front of you. You're moving so fast, you miss it when it's in front of you. You slow down a little bit. So COVID taught us to slow down.
So that is maybe the greatest legacy of COVID is what are we going to do as a society in response to what we've learned about ourselves, and how do we move forward?
I remember everything stopped. Cars, it was literally everything stopping. No one could do anything, and you were just a fixture.
There's always good and bad things in life, especially in addition to the pandemic. It was a rough summer. And after everything that happened, I have a nephew who's biracial, and I think I could say one tough one was we were all together, and I said, just imagine if that was your cousin. And I said, that's the one thing I want you to remember. You know, that nobody deserves to die like that. That was a tough one. That's just not fair. We need to do something about that.
It really helps to have some kind of focus on self, your spirit, your connections, and of course your physical maintenance of this temple.
Okay, so it was like a vacation for us. Basically, they said 2 weeks. We're like, okay, yes, 2 weeks of no school. We just got to relax. And then we're like, oh, they're setting up Google Meets. We've never really used Google Meets. We always knew it was there in the background, hiding behind Google Slides, Google Sheets, Google Forms, and Google Docs and everything else. We just never really used it. And then for these 2 weeks, we're like, Google Meets, Google Meets, Google Meets. It was just like a prep course. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, we're like, yes, we got to go back because we hate the Google Meets. And they're like, 2 more weeks. And we're like, okay, time to start over. Google Meets, Google Meets, Google Meets. And it went over and over until the summer. And they're like, well, we're not sure when we're coming back.
It was in February.
And that was the beginning of
called
all the craziness,
my
COVID
mother
madness.
to inform our family.
So where I
in the
picked
East,
it up,
he's from
I
Idaho,
have no
that
idea.
His father-in-law
Nothing ever
was
works
And
the way
especially, and I was mad.
Nothing ever works the way it's
I was
supposed
really
to.
mad.
He
I was
was
mad
in
that
a coma
I
for
was the
3
only
weeks
one,
and came
one of the
through.
few people that
And
was
it
still
was
in the
before
building, coming
our
into work every day.
society shut
And
down.
I made it from,
And he
and
was
especially
infected
in
as well.
April,
His
all the
mother-in-law,
way to
his
December,
daughter
without getting
was
sick,
this
keeping everybody in my department sick, and no issues, and I got it. I made it.
But
Where?
the inequities that exist have
I
always
don't
been
know.
there.
I think, without getting sick, he could have gotten it anywhere. I don't know. Could have been careless. I don't know. I got it. I don't know how I got it.
It's a lot of emotion that I think everybody's been feeling.
I'm just thankful for that, for that journey that we can still find even in the midst of all the, there was so much darkness. I remember everything darkness. Cars, it was literally everything stopping. The joy, if we can get a little joy, and we can definitely still survive. And I call us survivors. We were able to survive, and we're still going through. So we're still on that, still the same mode, but survivors.
That's why I say 2020 was a year that, it was probably the greatest year of my life because with the birth of my daughter, but it was a year that I don't ever want to have to go through again.